Imagine stepping into a room where every person is waiting for you to fail, where the cameras are rolling, the lights are hot, and the questions aren't meant to be answered. They're meant to destroy you. That was the setup Mel Gibson walked into on The View. What was billed as a routine interview quickly morphed into a calculated ambush, the kind designed to corner, shame, and break. But instead of dodging, deflecting, or erupting in outrage, Gibson did something nobody expected. He stayed calm. And with just one sentence, he flipped the entire script. Before diving into the story, tell us where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the moments. Mel Gibson walked onto the set of The View not as a guest, but as a target. From the moment he stepped on stage, calm, measured, with a faint smile, he knew exactly what was waiting for him. Across the table sat Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, and Sunny Hostin, veterans of televised confrontation, armed not with curiosity, but with accusations disguised as questions. Behind the scenes, producers had already made the call. This wasn't going to be an interview, it was going to be a reckoning. The audience, unsure of what to expect, offered polite applause as he took his seat. But the air was tight, electric. Everyone felt it. This wasn't about dialogue, it was about spectacle. And Gibson, long painted by the media as a pariah, was the centerpiece of today's main event. Whoopi leaned in first, her voice smooth but sharp. "So Mel, you've been very vocal lately in your support for a 100% tariff on foreign films. You really think censorship and economic nationalism are the answers now?" Laughter rippled through the audience, nervous, unsure if they were meant to laugh at him or with the show. The camera tightened on Gibson's face. He didn't blink. He didn't smirk. He leaned forward and answered, evenly, "Supporting American workers isn't censorship, it's survival." The tone shifted. For a beat, no one knew what to say. Joy Behar pounced next, more forceful. "You say you're protecting jobs, but isn't this just another way to push Trump's agenda? Why now? Why you?" Again, Gibson didn't react defensively, "Because I've seen what happens when Hollywood sells out. I've been in this town for decades, and when you stop investing in your own people, your actors, your crews, your neighborhoods, you become a slave to markets that don't care about your culture." That word slave hung heavy in the air. The crowd stirred. A few people clapped. Most stayed silent. Sunny Hostin cut in sharply. "You talk about culture, Mel, but let's be honest, you've had a history, an ugly one. Racist remarks, sexist comments. Are we really supposed to take you seriously now just because you're waving an American flag?" It was the kind of moment meant to crack someone, meant to make them defensive, desperate, maybe angry. But Gibson just paused, and then quietly, "I made mistakes, big ones, and I paid for them. But the fact that I'm sitting here today means something. I chose to face it, and I'll keep facing it, if it means I can help fix what's broken." Silence. Not a dramatic pause, real silence, the kind that comes when a room doesn't know how to process what was just said. Then, a single clap. Another. Momentum was shifting. Whoopi tried to take back control. "But tariffs don't fix character, Mel. You're talking about economic walls. What about the ones you've built?" That's when the moment happened. Mel leaned in, voice low and calm. "You don't tear down walls by shouting at people. You tear them down by listening, even to the ones you disagree with." The entire studio froze. No shouting, no dramatics, just a sentence that sliced through every layer of the setup. They had come to corner him. He came prepared to speak truth. And in that moment, the narrative didn't just change. It collapsed. The man they thought would crumble had just taken control of the room. The tension on set hadn't eased. It had evolved. By the time the second segment began, everyone felt it. The co-hosts were shifting in their seats, glancing at their notes with a little more urgency. The producers were whispering frantically through earpieces. Mel Gibson, though, remained still. His fingers tapped lightly on the armrest, a small, steady rhythm that somehow said, "I'm not going anywhere." Joy Behar dove in quickly. Her tone clipped and more pointed now, like she was trying to break through the unexpected calm that had taken over. "So let's talk economics," she said, the sarcasm barely hidden. "You think slapping a 100% tariff on foreign films is going to help American jobs? Isn't that just going to start a trade war and make movie tickets more expensive?" Gibson didn't fire back. He nodded slowly, as if she'd asked a completely reasonable question. "I get it," he said. Tariffs sound aggressive, but what's more aggressive is the way we've let studios ship post-production overseas, cast from cheaper labor pools, and gut American crews, just to save a buck. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the live audience. We're not competing, we're being undercut, and if we don't draw a line somewhere, Hollywood turns into a ghost town. A few claps broke out. One person even let out a small cheer. The camera didn't cut to the crowd, but in the control room, the producers were sweating. This wasn't the reaction they had anticipated. They were losing the room, not to controversy, but to conviction. Sonny leaned in, sharper now, trying to keep the panel's footing. But that's not how capitalism works, she challenged. If you can't compete globally, maybe you're not offering enough value. Gibson's jaw tightened, not in anger, but resolve. You know what else capitalism needs to work? He asked. Fairness. A grip on reality. Right now, it's not a competition, it's a race to the bottom, and the workers are the ones falling first. The silence returned, not awkward, not scripted, real. Whoopi jumped in, her voice aimed at shifting the frame. That sounds like a union talking point. I'm fine with that, Gibson said immediately without hesitation. Because the guy holding the boom mic on set, the woman editing footage until 3 a.m., they're not driving Lamborghinis. They're just trying to pay rent in Burbank. Again, the crowd stirred. The tone was changing, not because Gibson was dominating, but because he wasn't playing the usual game. He was meeting criticism with perspective, confrontation with calm. Then came the curveball. Joy slid a printed quote across the table toward him. This is from your last interview, she said. You said, and I quote, America should stop pretending globalism is the answer to everything. That's your stance? He didn't even glance at the paper. He just looked up, straight into her eyes. Yes. Isn't that just isolationism? No, he said firmly. It's prioritizing what's real. We've let globalism become a mask for exploitation of workers, of culture, of trust. I'm not saying we shut the world out. I'm saying we stop selling ourselves short. The studio felt heavy. The air felt weighted. His words weren't loud, but they landed. Sonny broke the moment, a little colder this time. You're turning this into some kind of populist crusade. Mel leaned forward again, calm, grounded, but unshakable. No. I'm reminding people they deserve better. And that was when the mood truly shifted. It wasn't just the audience that was starting to listen. It was the hosts. Joy's next line came out a little softer. Well, we'll be right back. The camera began to pan out for commercial, but the look in the co-host's eyes said everything. This wasn't the direction they had planned, and for the first time, they didn't seem sure how to stop it. The break was short, but the impact lingered. The producers whispered furiously through headsets, signaling for more applause cues, maybe trying to inject some energy back into the room. But it didn't matter. Something had shifted, and not just on camera. Mel Gibson wasn't there to debate policy anymore. He was something far more dangerous to the show's rhythm. He was poised, unapologetic, present, and presence when paired with truth is hard to silence. When they came back from break, Sonny went straight for the throat. Let's not pretend the past doesn't matter, she said. There are a lot of people who think you shouldn't even have a platform, Mel. You've said things. Hurtful, offensive things. Are we just supposed to forget that because you came in here and made a few decent points? The air tightened again. This was supposed to be the knockout, the moral strike. But Gibson didn't flinch. He looked straight ahead and spoke slowly. I don't want anyone to forget, he said. For a long time I was angry, reckless. I hurt people and there's no excuse for it. I've apologized, but I don't get to demand forgiveness. A few people in the audience nodded, quietly. Not in agreement with everything, but in recognition of something rare, honesty. I came here knowing you'd bring it up, he continued, and you should, because growth doesn't come from avoiding the past. It comes from dragging it out, staring it in the face, and asking if you're still the same man. The room didn't erupt. It listened. Joy tried to get the momentum back. But how do we know this isn't just a rebrand? A comeback attempt? Gibson gave the faintest of smiles. You don't, he said. You can't. But if I was chasing applause, I wouldn't be sitting here talking about tariffs and culture wars. I'd be selling a sequel. Even Whoopi let out a reluctant chuckle. But Sonny wasn't done. You say you've changed, but this tough guy nationalism, it sounds like the same old Mel Gibson, just with a different coat. Mel leaned in once more. Not defensive, not dismissive, just grounded. I don't think it's tough to want your country to stand on its own 2 feet. I think it's responsible. And I don't think it's nationalism to love the place that raised you and want it to treat its people better. Then quieter. So quiet the room leaned in. Everyone's so scared of being called a name that we forgot how to stand for something. For a second, no one said a word. Then applause. Real applause. Louder than before. Longer, and from more than just a few hands. The crowd wasn't clapping for perfection. They were clapping for something much harder to find. Sincerity. The audience wasn't reacting to a polished performance. They were reacting to something raw. Something almost forgotten in daytime television. Sincerity. Whether or not they agreed with Mel Gibson's politics, his past, or even his presence, they couldn't deny the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing left to prove, yet everything left to say. Whoopi Goldberg shuffled her notes, her voice dipping a bit from its earlier confidence. We're going to talk about Hollywood next, she offered, trying to steer the ship into calmer waters. But Mel didn't wait. He leaned in slightly and cut her off, gently, not combatively. I am talking about Hollywood. That made her pause. When your industry starts treating people like numbers, he continued, when the only thing that matters is overseas revenue, and when honest dialogue gets labeled dangerous, that's not entertainment. That's control. And we should all be concerned about that. This time, none of the co-hosts jumped in. No one cut to commercial. Even the producers, normally ready to flash a red light at the first sign of deviation, stayed silent. No one expected him to be the one talking about control. Certainly not like this. As the camera panned out and the show drifted into another commercial break, the studio's energy was noticeably different. The host stared ahead, processing. The audience was leaning in now, not out of obligation, but genuine interest. Mel Gibson wasn't there to defend a brand. He was there reclaiming his voice. When the third segment opened, it was clear that the producers had given up on salvaging their original plan. Social media had already exploded. Twitter feeds were flooding with clips from the broadcast, hashtags trending, reactions firing from both sides of the political aisle. Some praised Gibson's poise and courage, while others accused the show of losing control of its own platform. Still, none of that chaos made it onto the broadcast. On screen, Whoopi returned with a smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, and tried to shift the focus. Let's talk Hollywood, she said, lacing her fingers in front of her. You've been vocal about the industry turning its back on America. But haven't you benefited more from Hollywood than most? Gibson leaned back slightly, relaxing into the question. I have, he admitted, and that's exactly why I'm speaking out, because I've seen what happens behind the curtain. I've seen how priorities shift, how storytelling turns into propaganda, how real talent gets pushed aside in favor of political correctness. Sunny jumped in, her tone more pointed now. So you think Hollywood's broken? No, he said without skipping a beat. I think it's scared. Joy raised an eyebrow. Scared of what? He didn't hesitate. Scared of being irrelevant. Scared of honesty. Scared of the very people it claims to represent. A few murmurs echoed in the studio. One person in the front row clapped softly, almost instinctively. It wasn't fanfare. It was resonance. Gibson leaned forward again, his voice calm but unwavering. We used to make films that challenged power, that asked hard questions. Now you challenge anything and you're labeled toxic, dangerous, outdated. He scanned the panel. I've been all those things, but what I won't be is silent. Whoopi stepped back in. But isn't some of this just accountability? The world's changed. People expect more now. I'm not against accountability, he replied. I'm against selective accountability. We act like redemption is off the table, but only for certain people. You either believe in second chances or you don't. You can't sell forgiveness and then cancel it at the same time. That one landed. It wasn't just provocative, it was painfully clear. Even Joy seemed to flinch. Sunny saw the moment and tried to capitalize. Isn't it convenient that you're saying this now, when you've got nothing left to lose? Gibson didn't blink. You're right. I've lost a lot. My reputation, opportunities, friends. But what I haven't lost is my voice. He paused, letting the words hang. And that, he added. That's what makes people nervous. And the crowd erupted. This wasn't polite clapping anymore, it was real applause. Whistles, cheers. The audience wasn't just responding to what he said, they were responding to how he said it, without theatrics, without spin, without begging to be liked. And in doing so, he did the one thing no one at that table expected. He was being heard. The hosts looked shaken, not by outrage or disrespect, but by something far more destabilizing. Clarity. There was no shouting, no tantrum, just a man who walked straight into a trap, stayed centered, and spoke with unshakable conviction. Whoopi, trying to reclaim the tone, tossed the show to another break with a tight smile. "We'll be back in just a moment," she said. But everyone watching knew the moment had already arrived, and Mel Gibson wasn't playing their game anymore. He was rewriting it. As the credits rolled on The View, something was clearly off. The hosts wore polite smiles, but their eyes told a different story, one of disbelief. Mel Gibson hadn't just held his ground, he'd shifted it entirely. The show that was meant to corner him had lost control, and now the producers were scrambling behind the scenes, frantically reworking closing notes, debating which segments to post and which to quietly bury. Gibson, meanwhile, was already gone. No post-show interviews, no press run, no online victory lap. Just silence. And that silence made everything louder. On social media, clips from the segment exploded. Viewers on both sides of the political aisle were sharing the moment, quoting his calm defiance, his refusal to backpedal, and most of all, that one line. "We've convinced ourselves that only one side gets to define what offensive means." Late-night shows referenced it, commentators debated it, former critics even admitted, "I didn't expect that." Gibson had walked into a trap, stared it down, and spoke with such composure that even those who disagreed with him had to respect how he handled it. And The View? It fell quiet. Just one vague tweet. "Thanks for an honest conversation." But no one was talking about the show's message. They were talking about his. Because in a world addicted to noise, Mel Gibson had done the unthinkable. He said something true, said it clearly, and walked away. And somehow, that echoed louder than anything else. By the time most people were pouring their second cup of coffee the next morning, the internet had already decided. Whatever happened on The View wasn't just another celebrity interview. It was a cultural rupture. The clips from the episode weren't fading from timelines, they were spreading like wildfire. Everywhere you looked, someone was quoting that line. You didn't even have to explain it anymore. You don't tear down walls by shouting at people. You tear them down by listening, even to the ones you disagree with. That sentence, spoken calmly by Mel Gibson in the middle of a studio designed to shake him, had escaped the confines of the show and embedded itself in public conversation. In households across the country, people who hadn't thought about Gibson in years were watching the segment. Really watching it. Families paused dinner to rewind the clip. Friends passed it back and forth in group chats. Even critics who had long written him off found themselves saying the same thing. "I didn't expect that." And that's what made it powerful. It wasn't the redemption arc they'd planned. It wasn't packaged, polished, or pre-approved. It wasn't trending because of a PR push or a scandalous outburst. It was trending because it was unexpectedly real. In a media landscape driven by outrage, clickbait, and synthetic debate, here was a man who didn't dodge, didn't spin, didn't beg for grace. He simply showed up and spoke from the center of his scars. While headlines screamed for attention, the true impact lived in the quiet conversations happening offline. In coffee shops and kitchen tables, people weren't just talking about what Mel Gibson said, they were talking about what they felt. They were reflecting on the ways they'd written off voices, or tuned out opinions that didn't align with their own. The View had built a segment meant to confront controversy. What they got instead was an uncomfortable mirror. Media outlets across the political spectrum couldn't resist it. Some liberal sites accused Gibson of masking extremism in civility. Conservative outlets hailed him as a culture warrior who won without even throwing a punch. But none of the talking points mattered as much as the fact that he'd made them talk at all. And what stuck with people wasn't a gotcha moment or a fiery monologue, it was how calmly he disarmed the room. That line about offensive speech, that reminder that redemption doesn't come from silence, but from showing up. And most of all, That lingering phrase, "I don't need to belong to be right." In an age where belonging is currency and consensus is demanded, he had rejected both, and the public noticed. Behind the scenes at The View, damage control was in full effect. Staffers were still sorting through the aftermath, quietly debating what to highlight in the official recap and what to quietly ignore. They weren't just dealing with backlash, they were grappling with the fact that the narrative had escaped them. They didn't own the moment anymore. The internet did. Leaked staff communications reflected the mood: frustration, disbelief, even admiration, though no one dared to admit it too loudly. "He was supposed to be the easy segment," one producer reportedly said, "a tough face with a messy past, but he turned the table and made us the story." And maybe that was the twist nobody saw coming. This wasn't just about Mel Gibson defending himself. It wasn't about tariffs or Hollywood or patriotism. It was about whether someone deeply flawed could still speak truth and be heard. Whether a person with a past could show up without excuses and say something honest enough to fracture a polished machine. Because when the smoke cleared, no one was quoting the hosts. No one was sharing The View's take. They were sharing his. And the most remarkable part? He never raised his voice. Never played the victim. Never once said, "Look at me now." He just said his piece and left. No press tour, no book deal announcement, no exclusive follow-up with a friendlier outlet. Just silence, a kind of silence that felt earned, not because he had won, but because he had nothing more to prove. In the weeks that followed, the media moved on, as it always does. A new controversy, a new headline, a new viral moment. But for many, that interview lingered. Not because of the man, but because of the moment. Because in an era where everyone's screaming for attention, sometimes the most radical thing you can do is sit still, speak clearly, and then disappear. In the end, Mel Gibson didn't win because he convinced everyone he was right. He won because, for once, he said something that no one else dared to say. And people listened. So what do we take from this? Maybe it's not about agreeing with everything Mel Gibson said. Maybe it's not about forgetting the past or rewriting someone's history. Maybe it's just about recognizing that sometimes, in a world built on noise, the quietest voice in the room can be the most powerful. Because when a man walks into a space designed to tear him down, and instead stands his ground with calm, clarity, and conviction, it forces us to ask hard questions. Not just about him, about us. About how we listen, about who we silence, and about what we're really afraid of: truth, spoken plainly. This wasn't just a moment on daytime television, it was a reminder. You don't need a script to speak truth. You don't need approval to be heard, and you don't need to belong to be right. If this moment challenged you, inspired you, or made you think, even for a second, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Because the conversation doesn't end here. In fact, it's just beginning. Thanks for watching.